Welcome, everyone. We are excited to have you join us for our webinar, Housing Development and Childcare Facilities Strategies and Financing. We are also pleased to see so much interest on this topic. This map represents all of you. We have 19 counties participating this morning. I want to acknowledge and thank First 5 California, specifically Camille Mabin and Frank Furtek, for their generous funding and support of this project. Because of their commitment and desire to help Sonoma County's ECE community after the fire, we have been able to initiate this work. I also want to thank Moira Kinney from First 5 Association. She played an important role in making the connection between the Low Income Investment Fund and our Sonoma partners. This slide represents all of the partners working on this project. Angie Dillon-Shore, First 5 Sonoma County, Melanie Dotson and Laura Magnister from 4C Sonoma County, Susie Marin, the LPC for Sonoma County, Jonathan Stern and Susan Neufeld with Bridge Housing, and myself, Liz Winograd, with the Low Income Investment Fund. For today's presentation, you will hear from three of the partners, Angie Dillon-Shore, Susan Neufeld, and myself, Liz Winograd. Before we start, I want to go over a few logistics. This will be a 1-hour webinar. You will have access to a chat box and may send us your questions at any time during the presentation. At the end of our presentation, we will have time to answer them. Our presentation will cover two main topics: a recipe for success for all California counties to pursue co-location of childcare facilities within housing developments, and we will highlight lessons learned and some challenges we faced. This work began because First 5 California and First 5 Association reached out to the Low Income Investment Fund to ask if there was any way we could help Sonoma County work on recovering the loss of so many childcare spaces after the wildfires. Moira made the introduction to Executive Director of First 5 Sonoma, Angie Dillon-Shore, and a few weeks later, I went to Santa Rosa to meet with Angie, Melanie, and Susie. In that meeting, I learned about the unbelievable destruction this fire created. 5,300 homes were destroyed, and another 7,700 were damaged, and over 100,000 people were displaced. There was a great loss of childcare facilities as well. 500 spaces were lost. We know that the shortage of childcare is not only related to disaster. Access to high-quality, affordable childcare across California is an ongoing issue. This project focused on a few ways to work towards better and alternative infrastructure options for childcare facilities. The hope is that these unfortunate disasters we are now experiencing more often in our state does not push childcare further back. After about 7 months of work and planning together, we decided it was time to reach out to stakeholders and bring them together in one room to have an authentic conversation about this issue. We invited childcare operators, affordable housing developers, funders, elected officials, city officials, and ECE advocates to discuss the importance of co-locating childcare facilities within housing developments. Our goal is to work together with housing developers to create a pipeline of housing developments in the city of Santa Rosa that could co-locate childcare facilities. The video we are about to show, which is 4 minutes, gives you an overview.
Across California, 3/4 of the young children who need childcare don't have access to the high-quality, affordable early learning opportunities that will set them up for success in school and life.
This is the first time in my 20 years at 4Cs that we had parents who received a child care voucher who could not find care and they turned down the voucher.
In Sonoma County, the shortage of childcare was exacerbated by the devastating wildfires of 2017, causing the loss of over 500 licensed childcare spaces, literally overnight. Even with local efforts to recruit new providers in the wake of this loss, many existing providers are retiring and selling their facilities at market rate, costs that are beyond what is feasible for new providers to absorb. Sonoma County is just one example. Across the state, we're at a crossroads. Losses from natural disasters, the escalating costs of housing, combined with the severe shortage of affordable childcare, threatens our economic future.
Think about the loss of spending capacity. Think about the fact that they are really having to choose in some instances between actually, is it even worth it for me to continue working, to continue contributing to the local economy and filling critical roles, whether that might be actually as a teacher or as a childcare provider themselves. We will not be able to recruit and retain employees if they do not have a way to afford to live in Sonoma County and to build their families.
But out of crisis comes opportunity. Over the past year, First 5 Sonoma County, Community Child Care Council, and our local Child Care Planning Council have worked with the Low Income Investment Fund to catalyze an innovative local model of sustainable childcare infrastructure, co-location of childcare facilities within affordable housing developments. This model has been successfully replicated in other California communities.
To actually include childcare as a part of their developments. That includes possibly taking less money on some of our fees that we have at county government. That includes creating incentives, not only affordable, but actually desirable for builders, right?
So the added in childcare is one of the ways you can get points to get concessions and other things as part of your project. So if you add childcare to your project, we can add density. I'm giving you more density to your project. You can add square footage for businesses. So what that did is it expedited the childcare facilities. The other thing is that reduced the fee from about $4,000 to zero.
Co-location of childcare facilities in housing developments is utterly dependent on local government planning policy, leveraging private sector investment with state and federal dollars, and actively collaborating with your local childcare experts. We have a great opportunity right now. Governor Newsom created legislation for a statewide facilities fund. These anticipated funds can support construction of new childcare centers, renovation and repair, or increasing the quality of existing childcare centers.
I'm not sure if you all know that our governor, who is a real children's champion, Governor Newsom, has put in $240 million into our state budget specifically for childcare facilities.
And certainly what we've learned is that the residents who live in our communities are so thankful for that childcare facility. It makes so much sense to have people live and care for their children in really the same space. So again, this is not a cash return on investment, but it is a social impact return on investment. I think that the presence of children also makes for a better operating property. So children and children-focused programming makes for less, violence, less harm to the property, less harm to the residents.
I want to talk to you a little more about why we need to develop childcare facilities within housing, as well as the lessons learned and challenges we came across. We already know childcare and housing assistance are crucial supports for low-income families that can improve their economic and housing stability and promote their children's healthy development and long-term success. Building affordable housing is more developed and systemized. Unfortunately, building childcare facilities is not. There is no industry-wide source of financing the development of childcare facilities. Hopefully, with the funding in the governor's budget, $263 million, which is specifically for childcare facilities in California, the design and construction of childcare facilities continues to be a specialized business. We want to make sure these spaces are designed to be the best learning environment for children. Affordable housing developers have minimal experience and training with respect to special requirements for building childcare facilities. Just to mention a few, they are not aware of usable square footage for children, the plumbing that is needed for child-sized sinks and toilets, the natural light and windows at children's levels. However, many affordable housing developers recognize that quality childcare facilities are an important asset to a community. We heard this loud and clear at our convening in May. We don't have to convince them of the importance. So now it's up to us to educate them so that childcare facilities are in the forefront of their plans when they are building housing. Therefore, it makes sense from a people, policy, and business perspective to leverage the affordable housing industry as a partner. Now I will turn it over to my colleague, Angie Dillon-Shore.
Good morning, everybody. So generating the political will to open the door to establishing this kind of model is absolutely critical to go forward with something like this. So your elected representatives at the county and at the municipal level, your city council members, mayors, county supervisors, these folks are uniquely positioned to deliver the message to housing developers that access to childcare is a priority issue for the communities that they serve as elected officials. This is especially important if developers are competing for opportunities to build new units. It creates a non-monetary but powerful incentive for a housing developer to align with the elected's priority. Obviously, there's a county supervisor on every local First Five commission, so that can generally be a logical place to start by engaging and edifying them about the demand and unmet need for childcare and how this model of co-locating with affordable housing has worked in other communities. It's really helpful if you can equip them with talking points, compelling data, and even a story or two about a project that has worked in another community. Whatever they need to be able to make a compelling case to those that they can influence. We're really fortunate in Sonoma County to have a supervisor on our commission that is a working mother with 3 kids under 5 who intimately and personally understands the challenges that working parents face trying to find adequate, affordable childcare, ideally nearby to their workplace or home. You saw Sonoma County Supervisor Linda Hopkins on the video speaking very passionately as both a parent and as a supervisor, but realistically, that's not always the setup. Local government planning departments define zoning, building code requirements, fee thresholds, all of these things which can impact whether and under what conditions and costs the childcare facilities are allowed uses in the housing project area. So it's really important to learn about your city and county general plan policies with regard to zoning and permitting for childcare. If there are specific plans, Sonoma County right now has a downtown plan, which there's going to be a lot of affordable housing built. And also if there are incentives such as tax credits for developing in opportunity zones. So you really want your county and city staff that oversee planning, permitting, and economic development as well to understand that childcare is a critical element of local economic infrastructure. It's well worth the time and effort to cultivate the relationships with them and help them embrace this concept. And it will take you far in terms of generating the interest and willingness on the part of developers to include childcare as part of an affordable housing project. So I'll turn it back to you, Liz.
There's a great deal of planning that goes on into these projects for both the developer and the childcare operator. It is crucial to develop the partnership early on so that the childcare space is not compromised and the best learning environment is constructed. This is why working with city housing and planning is so important. We want to know what housing projects are being built years in advance so there is plenty of time to include childcare facilities in their plans. In most cases, the developer will put out an RFP to find the childcare operator. In the RFP, they will describe the housing development, the construction timeline, and the expected role of the childcare operator. Some of the key components included will be a rough schematic design, the square footage that they can provide for the childcare facility, whether there will be parking, and information about drop-off zones. I also want to mention they will inform you of their commitment and what they will build at their cost. This is usually a warm shell. A warm shell is the exterior walls and utility stub outs, such as electrical, plumbing, mechanical, and fire protection hookups. But there are no interior improvements that they make. The tenant improvements is the childcare operator's responsibility. In the RFP, they will ask the childcare operator for extensive information about their organization to be sure the business fits within their mission, as well as be confident the doors will remain open for many years to come. There are some of the other requirements and information they will ask the childcare operator is their mission and vision, the philosophy of the program, ages of the children that will be served, staffing, but most importantly, the organization's current financials. They will be asked for projected project budgets as well as the projected operating budget for the new site. Again, in most cases, the childcare operator will hire its own architect, one that has experience in designing spaces for children. Sometimes it could be the same architect the developer is using. In this case, you should hire your own architect to consult with theirs. You also want to make sure to bring licensing on early in the process. When building childcare facilities within housing, zoning and planning has already been approved, and we know that this will not be an issue. However, you do want to get them on board early. Take them through your design process to make sure when the space is completed and ready to be licensed, it is no surprise to them and hopefully no issue that holds up opening the center. We have seen these projects from start to finish take about 2 years. However, if the construction of the housing is delayed, so will the childcare center. Now I turn it over to my colleague Susan Neufeld, who will talk about financing.
Good morning. I'm so pleased to join you this morning. And again, as a reminder, feel free to put in the chat room any questions that you may have. We will answer them at the end of the webinar. I'm here to talk about financing and funding the project, which is really, I think, the largest worry in the partnership between affordable housing and childcare facilities. Unfortunately, there's no one magic formula. There are many complex layers to financing in affordable housing, and then when you add in childcare, it can become even more complex. That said, there are multiple options for financing, including some that we've already mentioned, like tax credits, new markets tax credits, grants, opportunity zones, and other traditional financing approaches. The key is to start these conversations early and to have them often. Financing is like putting together a Rubik's Cube, and it can take time and a lot of energy to determine an appropriate model. And oftentimes, affordable housing developers have strong relationships with cities and municipalities and can leverage those relationships to get additional support for building the childcare space. The other thing that should be considered very early on is the lease agreement between the childcare operator and the affordable housing owner or landlord. And there are a variety of models to consider. One of the key questions is the childcare operator a nonprofit that is doing Head Start or state preschool, subsidized preschool? Or is the childcare provider a market rate provider who is charging market rate fees? These types of issues can help determine the type of lease agreement that is in favor of the relationship. And these can include everything from a traditional retail lease agreement where the operator pays market rate rent to a retail lease agreement where there is low cost rent or rent that escalates over time. And I'll just highlight as one example, in Bridge's history, we had a relationship with a childcare provider that was a nonprofit and provided a lot of subsidized childcare slots. Because they had to pay for the tenant improvements and they needed to use their cash flow to do that, we worked out an arrangement where we charged $1 per year for the rent and then escalated it slowly over the next 7 years. This gave the tenant the ability to get financially stable, and it ensured to us that they were going to be a sustainable childcare provider in the space. And that's something that's incredibly important. As owners, we're customizing a space for a child care center. And so we need to know that whoever operates that has the long-term sustainability to survive over time. Typically, the type of lease depends on the financial health of the child care operator and the mission of the development organization. For an example, an operator who serves only low-income children may get a significant rent break because they have a mission as opposed to a for-profit operator. The other aspect of the lease agreement is to negotiate other features. Even if you have a market rate operator, it's possible to negotiate a set aside for low-income children, or to prioritize children who live in the building by recruiting from that population first, or offering scholarships to low-income qualifying children. The point is that there's a lot of ways to negotiate the relationship so that you're bringing a community benefit into the neighborhood, and that the lease should reflect the goals and visions of the owner and the financial needs and long-term sustainability of the operator. One thing I will say is the lease is incredibly important, and in my experience, it's gone from a couple of pages to a 20-page document. And that's because it's really important to negotiate all aspects of the relationship. Who's going to clean the trash? What happens if the plumbing breaks down? Who handles different issues that may pop up? The last thing is the tenant improvement costs. Typically, when developers partner with childcare operators, we build out what's called the soft shell, and inside is really up to the operator to build out. And this can be a very significant expense. Again, this is important to negotiate early and often. A lot of operators struggle to have the cash to do the full tenant improvement, but this is where grants, CDBG funding, or other kinds of fundraisers can come in handy. Again, the point of this slide is to say, have those conversations at the very beginning of the relationship. Even if it takes 2 or 3 years to get to completion, knowing what the roadmap is early and on is really going to help support the relationship. I'll now turn it back to Angie.
Thanks, Susan. So in Sonoma County, as Liz described, this process was really catalyzed by the wildfires in 2017. And we were so fortunate that First 5 California was willing to step up and fund LIIF to work with us to help us address that loss of the childcare spaces. So I think it's relevant to tell you a little bit about the first time we met as a team with Liz. We started off with a pretty traditional approach that involved an extended timeline around engaging stakeholders and assessing our assets and our needs. And other aspects of basically a strategic planning process. So our team really pushed back on that approach because we recognized how much planning and needs assessment we've already done in Sonoma County. We're very skilled at planning processes, but it's a whole other thing to be skilled at implementing. And we knew that what we really needed to do was leverage the urgency and the bias toward action that was catalyzed by the sheer magnitude of the losses. So we just started engaging the folks that we knew were going to be critical to this process, and particularly people that we already had a relationship with. So this included Linda Hopkins, our supervisor that's on the commission, and then also the CEO of the Santa Rosa Chamber of Commerce, Peter Rumble, who we already had a great working relationship with. We're currently working with the Chamber on developing an employer-supported childcare initiative in sort of a parallel process with this model. So Peter was an important part of the overall effort to engage the private sector around access to childcare. One very pivotal thing we did in terms of engagement was that we hosted an exclusive screening of the film No Small Matter at Santa Rosa City Council chambers. We did this early in the morning. We provided breakfast and coffee, and we invited elected officials from the county and cities and towns, and even school boards, and some influential people from the business community, as well as the planning staff from the city of Santa Rosa. Before we screened the film, we asked the mayor and our supervisor to say a few words of welcome, and so really positioned them as influencers around this topic as opposed to me or our ED of our Child Care Planning Council. So we really kind of gave them the talking points and positioned them to influence these other highly influential people. Then after that, about a month later, we hosted a convening at our local community foundation, and you saw some of this on the video, where we invited housing developers, childcare operators, and other stakeholders, in addition to the folks on our team from LIIF, Bridge Housing, and Community Child Care Council. We gave speaking parts, again, to the Assistant City Manager for Santa Rosa, who's also the head of planning, as well as the mayor and our supervisor. Again, setting them up as owning this issue to influence developers. So we've been really successful at brokering our relationships with elected officials, particularly at the city of Santa Rosa, where the greatest loss of childcare, I mean, it was already a crisis prior to the fires, but that really just catalyzed it. And so we've made a lot of inroads with the planning department now, and we are now working with them to identify just an ongoing soft pipeline of housing projects, and primarily the downtown area over the next 5 years. So we'll be collaborating to host regular meetings quarterly to review whatever opportunities are coming down the pike and progress of projects that we begin. And so the first of those meetings is on the calendar for next week. So I will hand it back over to you, Liz, to talk about LIIF's resources.
Great, thank you. So in our final report, which you will all receive before the end of the year, we're creating a recipe for success for counties to pursue co-location of child care facilities within affordable housing. If this is something that you are all interested in, you're more than welcome to contact me and discuss a partnership. And on the slide here, you have my email. Also on the slide, we provide you with a link to the Child Care Handbook. This guide was written by Bridge Housing and the Low Income Investment Fund. It lays out in details the steps to co-location of child care facilities within affordable housing. We seem to hear a lot about this is the Child Care and Housing Development Bible. It's pretty big, but I highly recommend you at least skim through it and contact LIIF or Bridge if you have questions. I also want to mention again the commitment our governor is making to childcare. He has put into legislation $263 million specifically for childcare facilities. This will be renovation and repair, capital new development, as well as acquisition. We are currently in conversations with the California Department of Education about the requirements that will be needed to apply for funding these facility projects. I will keep you updated on information as we receive it. So now I think we'll go, and I want to thank everybody for participating, but now we do have quite a bit of time to answer some questions that you have sent in.
Hi, this is Susan, and I'm going to play the role of MC here. I think one of the first questions that we got from Molly, I'm not going to try that last name, but Molly, is that she was wondering if there were some success stories and if there's something that we can highlight. So I'm going to present a success story from the perspective of a developer, and then I'm going to ask Liz to talk about more of a citywide strategy. So Bridge Housing has made a commitment to developing childcare whenever it's feasible in our projects. And one of the childcare centers that we developed about 15 years ago is called Kai Ming. And it's actually one of the strongest and most, has a strong reputation in San Francisco as a very strong childcare preschool, and it's actually one of the few dual language Mandarin Cantonese preschools in the nation. And it's also a Head Start. So when we started developing this, it's located in a place called North Beach Place, which is the name of the housing development.
And when we started developing the Child Care Center, I think this was one of the earliest child care centers that we sponsored, and it was a steep learning curve for us. One of the critical issues that we had to address was the availability of outdoor space. For those of you familiar with San Francisco, this development is in the heart of North Beach. There is not a lot of green space available, and it was an infill development, which meant we had to use the footprint that existed, and we couldn't necessarily create additional green space. So the way we worked it out was we developed a tot lot that could serve two purposes. During the day and during the child care business hours, it's exclusively for the use of the child care center, and it meets their outdoor space requirements. And then after hours and on the weekends, it's a public space that's used for the residents of North Beach Place. And I highlight this as an illustration of how some creative work together can really solve for what seems like typical problems around space. I will say that it has necessitated a lot of conversation about who's responsible for maintaining the space, who cleans the space, what happens if the space is misused. But we've had a successful relationship for over a decade, and we're very excited that this can be an illustration of how to build childcare in a dense urban environment. And now I'll hand it over to Liz.
Yeah, it definitely is a problem in our urban areas with outdoor space. But I want to talk a little bit more about sort of how we're doing this here in San Francisco, and are testing this out in Sonoma County, specifically in the city of Santa Rosa as well. When we started this work here at the Low Income Investment Fund in partnership with the Office of Early Care and Education, we created a interagency committee. In this committee, we have the Office of Community Investment and Infrastructure, the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, the Office of Early Care and Education, First Five, and of course the Low Income Investment Fund. And so we come together on a monthly basis to talk about the housing projects that are being built several years out, and we discuss where, if in fact these housing developments can have childcare facilities. And we go back and forth. We're also fortunate here in San Francisco that we do have a childcare developer impact fee. And so we're able to provide funding or partial funding for these projects. I mean, Susan answered slightly, the Mayor's Office of Housing holds the CCDBG funds, and therefore there's some funding there as well, and local, and now I think we're poised well with the state funding in our state budget.
So on that note, Liz, we have a question from Jill Kowalski. Is the $260 million that you mentioned from Gavin Newsom just for facility costs, or can any of it be applied towards operational costs?
Yeah, it cannot be used for operational costs. This funding will go to reno and repair, capital new development, and acquisition only. Mm-hmm. There might be, and we're not sure, but there might be some startup costs, and some of those startup costs will go to operations. So maybe, I think we need to wait and see what the regulations will be and what the money we can specifically use for. Mm-hmm. So as soon as we have all of this information, we will definitely pass it along to all of you.
Mm-hmm. So we also have a question from Wendy Went. How are childcare operators identified early in the building development process? And I'll maybe respond to this from the developer perspective. This is where relationships with local planning councils and the local 4Cs and Low Income Investment Fund, others who are working in the childcare space, can be super helpful. Admittedly, most developers don't know the world of childcare. It is its own regulatory labyrinth. We're very familiar with our own regulatory labyrinth, and so we often need partners to help decode the regulatory worlds and to figure out how to reconcile those two worlds. So working with local planning councils or local 4Cs can be super helpful in helping us identify strong, high-quality childcare providers. For long-term owners like affordable housing developers, we really care about bringing quality services into our buildings, but also the long-term financial sustainability. Because we work with folks who have different income levels, the last thing we want to do is to bring in a service that people build a dependency on, and then it's cut short or it terminates before its time. And so that sustainability is really important. Also because we're building out the space to custom fit a childcare operator. So this is where those planning councils can help us determine who needs space, who has the capacity to grow, who has the financial strength to go through this project together, and who ultimately meets or exceeds licensing requirements and is recognized as a strong childcare operator. And those conversations have to happen extremely early in the process. Okay, we're looking at the chat board and it looks like we don't have necessarily any new questions here, but I want to unmute because I know there are a lot of folks who had to call in and are not able to get online, so that we can give folks on the telephone a chance to ask their questions. So it might be a little noisy when we unmute, but if you do have a question, please speak up and we'll try to get to them.
This is what is going to be our policy, is we're going to, right, at this price point, we will consider, investing.
Okay, we can hear some folks.
Right, that hasn't been a policy.
No, there's no policy.
It needs to be
And it's just simply
discussion strategy.
yeah, it's terrible. It isn't.
Okay, we were muted, so we're going to go back and thank you for your comments. One of the questions was, how will equity in acquisition reflect on rural counties? So I'm going to kick that off to Liz to answer.
So thank you. That's a really good question, and something that we don't have that much experience in rural counties, and I think that I will take a look into that and hopefully be able to get back to you on that question. I think that if you're able to purchase your facility, I think that it's a great opportunity. In terms of specifically in rural counties, unfortunately, that's not something that I can answer right now, but as I mentioned, I will try to get some more information about that and email you and answer that more specifically.
Great. So I'm looking to see if there are any more questions, and it looks like we may have run out of questions. Although I do want to share, I think I tried to share this when we were muted, but there was a nice comment from Margot Gould that she mentions in San Joaquin County that they are working with visionary home builders and that they are building new low-income housing and tend to put in a space for childcare, often the Head Starts. And I will just give a shout out to local Head Starts. Those can be terrific partners, and there's often strong mission alignment between developers and local Head Starts. Many years ago, when I worked for a different affordable housing developer in Southern California, we created a strategic partnership with San Bernardino State Preschool and Head Start and built multiple centers. And it was a terrific relationship that allowed them to leverage some of their other family resource funding to bring additional parenting supports into the building. So those are great partnerships to explore. Okay. Oh, sorry. It was Patty Brown who asked the question, I think. Are the developments multifamily? That's another question that we have. And the answer is yes, they are. Although at Bridge, we've done other models where we have embedded childcare in senior housing. We typically do that when there is an overwhelming neighborhood need for childcare. One of our early steps is to look at the planning documents for a particular municipality to see what childcare looks like in that area. And what I will say is that's also an interesting model where sometimes we have an intergenerational approach. For example, at Kai Ming, it's technically, the Child Care Center is technically in the senior portion of the development. We have both a multifamily and senior portion, and the child care space is downstairs from the senior building. And we have an opportunity for a couple of seniors to volunteer with the program, which is absolutely terrific. The kids have actually named one of the active volunteers the official grandpa of the child care space. So it's a great benefit for everyone. It can really support seniors not being socially isolated and also give kids an intergenerational exposure. Of course, we always ensure that there's the live scanning and the fingerprinting that needs to be done. But it's a terrific way to build a sense of community that's attached to the childcare space. Next question, any experience building childcare as part of a commercial development? I think this is probably for me again, and I'll just say that we typically don't do commercial spaces exclusively, although we will have commercial space sometimes as part of the housing development. And we've certainly done a very traditional tenant relationship with childcare operators where they function no different than a normal business. But again, I would say even when you do that commercial type of relationship, because the space has to meet licensing requirements, because the spaces can be so unique, it is still very important to have that relationship established early.
I'd like to add to that as well. While it's not something that we do much of, that we find typically the childcare facilities are going into affordable housing. I mean, if there's a relationship that you could build between a commercial space realtor, I mean, I think that's a great idea. I think wherever we can find spaces to house childcare facilities is great, and of course, hopefully, be able to, that there's some relationship with this commercial realtor to be able to have affordable rent. Mm-hmm.
I guess one final comment I would make is from a housing developer perspective, typical affordable housing developers really have a community development orientation. And what that means is we're not just trying to build a building that sort of stands alone and houses people, but we're also trying to look and see how that housing development can be a community asset and can bring the community into the building and also expose the building to the surrounding community. And so childcare is really a very, very strong way to accomplish that goal. And really our intent is to create vibrancy within a neighborhood. One of the questions that we did get was also whether we would share the deck via email. And Liz, do you want to talk about how we're going to push this out?
Yes, sure. Clearly there's a video in here. We need to figure out how we can share the slide deck with the video. But all of those that have signed up for the webinar, we will send you the PowerPoint presentation along with our notes as well for you to be able to go back. We're also recording this webinar, and so we will post it and you'll be able to access that as well, and we'll send you the link to that too. Mm-hmm.